Hi everyone, this is Againstime with grinderschool.com. Today I'll be reviewing two recent nine-handed sit-and-goes played on Poker Stars by Grinder School member PGM 1971. These tournaments have recently changed in structure. Have drawn some attention. They begin with antes in the very first blind level, which was not the case previously. The payout structure has remained consistent, and they are still nine-handed as mentioned, but the antes do start earlier, which increased the necessity to get involved in these tournaments. And so I did want to review some of these games, especially for those of you still playing on Poker Stars who may be located outside of the United States. So we'll go ahead and get started here. As is usually the case with my own tournaments, I'll be skipping over hands that don't become involved with early on. I'll be a little more curious to see which hands this player chooses to fold or not fold when compared to my own tournaments, because I won't know beforehand their tendencies. So we may look a little more in depth at some of these spots than I might my own tournaments. But we'll go ahead and get started here. This first one looks like a hand of interest. Here with the ace-jack suited, this player chooses to check. This is a little more passive than I would suggest playing the hand. I realize you're out of position here and it's an early blind level. Even so, this hand is certainly strong enough for an isolation raise. You could even isolation raise ace-10 suited or ace-jack offsuit, or like king-queen suited here. Weaker hands than are held, maybe like pocket sevens, pocket sixes, and so on. I would recommend making it 100. 60 plus 1 blind per limpers, so 100 here would be a good raise size. It's not a mistake to just check here, and sometimes I might choose to do that, but in general your hand ranks to be ahead of the limping ranges here, and you can certainly raise it up and expect to get a call and take the initiative in a hand and build a pot with what figures to be the best hand, and that's what I'd recommend doing. So I'd make it 100 here. This player chooses to check. The flop is 8-9-6 with 2 hearts. He chooses to check here. That's fine, having no hand, no draw. On the turn, similar situation. Picks up a gut shot here, not really much to work with, and he chooses to check again. Bet of 20 here, and he lets it go. No problem with that whatsoever. I agree with everything in the hand other than the pre-flop decision. I would raise it up to 100 there, and I'd recommend you do the same. He chooses just to fold king-6 offsuit for 20 chips on the button. That's probably the correct play. It's the play I generally make myself. I'd be limping here with any suited king and maybe like king-9 offsuit or better. So I agree with the fold. Ace-king will certainly be a raise here. He makes it 80, 60 plus 1 per limper, exactly the same raise I would make. We get a call here from the button and a call from the initial limper. Flops is fairly dry, 10-10 deuce rainbow with 300 chips in the middle. He does choose to check here. That's probably what I would recommend and generally do myself. If I had a 10 here, I would likely check this as well. There hasn't been much shrink show by anyone. We're only going to be getting called here by like a pair, maybe 2 strong overs like ace-king or ace-queen. And so generally I would suggest checking here. Not really much value to be gained from a weaker hand, and our hand still does have showdown value. Sorry, I keep saying our hand, but his hand still has showdown value. The ace on the turn, when checked to this player, he should probably make a bet here. There's now some gut shot straight draws and flush draws available, and we'll be getting value from any ace here. He does choose to bet 237 into 300. That's fine. It's a little on the larger size of what I would consider like a reasonable bet size in this scenario. I'd probably make it 180 or 200. Anywhere from 150 to 250 I would consider reasonable, so it's a little on the larger side, but I would consider it reasonable. The reason why I would suggest making it a little smaller is so if one were to make a river bet, it wouldn't be such a large bet that it would contribute a substantial portion of the remaining stack. It does get a call here. 3 of hearts comes on the river, which shouldn't really change much of anything. 4-5 made a straight, but I don't expect a player to often have 4-5 here, if ever. He chooses to check the river. I think that's a little too nitty. I think there's value to be gained from an ace. If you bet here and get raised it up, you can be fairly certain your opponent holds a 10 or possibly a full house here. I would suggest betting the river. I think there's plenty of value. I'd make it something like 350. If you get raised, you can let it go, and an ace will certainly call you. His opponent chooses to check behind and shows down ace queen. Certainly some misvalue here. A bet of 350 would have almost certainly been called. So a little bit of a misvalue spot there on the river. King Jack here. This is fairly early position with 6 players behind in the early position limp. I would fold it as well. It's a disciplined fold, but it's the right play to make, so I totally agree with this fold. It looks like we got an elimination on this player here. Okay, King 8 suited. This is what I would consider an optional raise. In the later blind levels, say 50, 100 and later, you would pretty much automatically raise this hand from this position. It would be super standard. And in the early blind levels, like say the 10, 20, 15, 30, it would be a pretty standard fold. In the 25, 50, it's debatable whether or not it's a good raise. Some regs will make the raise, some regs won't. I generally will make the raise. I'm on the looser, aggressive side of regs. It's, as I mentioned, I consider it fairly optional. I don't really have a critique either way. It just depends on your style. But it is a raise that you can be making. And once the 5100 hits and the effective stacks are less than 20 blinds, you should certainly be making that raise. But in this blind level, it's acceptable to fold it. King 10. It's going to be on about the same relative strength level as King 8 suited. If he was unwilling to raise the King 8 suited from this position, so should he be willing to be unwilling to raise the King 10 from an earlier position. So this fold is in line with his previous aggressive level and looseness, and I have no problem with it as well. This would be an even looser raise than the previous one. As I mentioned, these hands are on similar strength level and the position is slightly worse here, so it makes perfect sense that he would fold this hand. And at this point, I would probably do the same. Ace King here is certainly going to be a raise. He makes it 3x. I don't have any problem with a 3x raise in the 25-50 or earlier. I have noticed this player make it 125 in certain situations. Both raise sizes are fine. The 3x raise gives you a little more fold equity, but a little worse cost effectiveness. The 125 raise gives you a little less fold equity, but better cost effectiveness. They both have reasonable arguments for using them. Once the 5100 blind level and later, I would suggest making 2.5x raises or smaller. So I have no problem with this. One thing I do want to draw attention to, and I don't know that this isn't the case here, but whatever raise size you choose in a certain blind level, you should be consistent with it throughout that blind level to help disguise what kind of hands you have. If your raise sizes are based on your hand strength, it's going to become fairly transparent to skilled opponents what you're doing. And so once again, no problem with the 150 raise, but every raise he makes through the 25-50 better also be 150, or that's a leak in the game. Okay, it looks like he doesn't get any callers here and accumulates some chips. He chooses to check fours here in the big blind. That's the right play. When you get a fairly early position limp, when you're out of position here in like the middle stages, you don't really want to make this like 200 and then have to bet like 300 in the flop and possibly jeopardize your stack size. Perfectly valid to just check here. Once the blinds get in the 5100, I might suggest even shoving over this limp with effective stacks of about 13 blinds. But in this blind level, this is what I would do as well, is check behind. The flop is deuce 3-5 rainbow. This is a really good board for leading out. That's how I would suggest playing it. It disguises your hand well. Prevents overcards from coming off that potentially devalue your hand. And not only does your hand have quite a bit of value now, which can be diminished on a later street, but it also has redraw value to an open-ended straight. That being the case, I think leading out is the best play. You could also make an argument for check raising. I don't think it's quite as good. I think it comes out as pretty strong, and the fours pretty much don't have much value at that point. You're pretty much relying on the straight. Check calling is also problematic when you're not the aggressor because of overcards coming and devaluing your hand on later streets. So I'm pretty confident that leading out is generally the best play, and I would lead out for 120 here. He does choose to check, and his opponent checks behind. He hits the straight on the turn and leads out here. He definitely needs to bet the turn if he's not going to bet the flop. Immediately gets raised and then comes back over the top for less than the full stack. This looks very suspicious to me. I think it's too revealing as to your hand strength. It pretty much tells your opponent immediately that you have a straight and you're only getting called by a straight. So I think that this is a mistake. I would probably flat this raise and then maybe lead out on the river or check call the river. I think that coming back over the top here is so strong, looks so strong that you're driving action away from any weaker hand. And these players are just going to pretty much get all in here. And they both pretty much have the same hand as expected. So yeah, I would either slow it down a little bit or just donk lead out on the flop would be my suggestion as an alternate path to probably greater value against hands that aren't already a straight. It's worth noting this player was willing to limp Queen 4 offsuit in an early position in the early levels. If this player is limping this loose, you can certainly ISO raise 4s over that as well. Player chooses to limp again. Definitely a very loose passive player. I don't have HUD stats because this was not my tournament, but I would expect this player is something like a 40 VPIP, maybe even higher, and then probably a PFR of less than 25% of the VP, as is typical of loose passive players. He chooses to fold here for 25 chips. I agree with that decision. Even though this player is limping all kinds of junk in early position, 3-5 offsuit is not a hand you want to get involved with out of position, so just let it go. It's the right choice. Okay, he gets Jack 7 suited here. Looks like the blinds are 40-80. This is a raise easily from the cutoff, probably even from the hijack in this situation. This should be a raise, a little bit of a missed opportunity here. Okay, I'd probably flat this with this stack size with the Jack 10 suited. It looks like he folds. He's a little bit tighter of a reg than I am. You could certainly flat this and play in position. It's really only, it looks like it's a raise into 5 players, but it's really only a raise from the hijack because this player only has 6 chips. You could certainly flat this in position and in the long run gain some chips by doing so. So a little too tight here as well. Good fold with the 10-6 suited. I probably would not defend either unless it was a very loose aggressive reg who frequently raised my blind. This is fine to fold this. You could limp against the loose passive player. Looks like the one we attacked, this loose passive, is eliminated, so I'm not really sure this player's style. If he were loose passive, I'd certainly limp the Jack 8 offsuit. If he were tight aggressive, I'd probably raise it into him. If he were loose aggressive, I would just fold. So it depends on the style of this player, but it's certainly fine to have folding in the repertoire there, and would frequently be the right choice. Okay, blinds have gone up to 61-20. We're in what I consider the high blind stage. This should probably be a steal. The only argument against making a steal here, Queen 9 off from the cutoff is a standard steal. I'm not sure if this player would steal this hand or not. I'm hoping the reasoning for him not stealing is the stack size of these players, because you don't really want to race through them and then commit yourself to call a shove from, say, this player. If that's the reason he's making this choice, then I agree with the notion. I think these players are more likely to flat rather than shove, however. And I'd probably still go for the steal opportunity because of that anyway. It looks like we get a shove here and a call, a couple big hands colliding. So it looked like it, well, actually would have worked out to raise. But anyway, it doesn't really matter what the result is. It matters about the quality of the decision. So if he's not raising because of the stack sizes here, I agree. If he's not raising because he doesn't think Queen 9 is good enough, then I disagree. So it depends. Looks like we got a shove here and an auto call with the 7s. So pretty standard collision between these players based on hand strength. Good fold here. Fold. All right. He chooses to just shove the 7s. I have no problem with that. He's about 12 blinds deep, a little less. You really have the option of min raising or shoving here. Both are profitable, both are valid. I kind of like the shove in this spot. We don't really have regs here. We have players that are likely to flat, and you don't really want to play post flop with 12 blinds, especially right before the blinds go up again. So I think the shove is probably the better play, and that's the play he chooses to make. This is a missed raise. Into 5 players in the high blinds, ace 9 is super standard to steal. Any suited ace, ace 9 plus, maybe even ace 8 plus would be a raise here. I'll even sometimes raise ace 5 here. Should make it 240 for the steal. Okay, looks like... Okay, he gets a shove here. He just shoves over. No reason to get cute and flat it. Just get all in. Looks like we get a 3-way collision here. The jack 8 shove is too loose. The aces call is obviously fine. The 10's call is fine as well. So the initial shover is too loose. The other two did the right thing. Looks like our hero here will gain a lot of chips. I'll move into the chip lead. I would fold the jack 7 as well, and the queen 5. Fold here is fine. This is close. I think his decision to fold is the correct one. At 10 blinds or less, you're auto shoving any king blind versus blind here. It's about 11, a little over 11 blinds. I would say something like king 4, king 5 offsuit, or any suited king would be a shove here. So this is a pretty disciplined fold and the right choice. As long as you're not limping here or making small raises, you should be playing shove fold in this blind versus blind spot. And I think a fold is probably the best decision. Queen 9 is certainly a raise here. You could even shove it. I like raising it better. You'll be committed by odds to call the player in the big blind should he shove, and you can fold to delf him if he does anything. I think this is too tight to let this hand go. I would certainly be raising it up. Same thing here. 10-9 from the hijack is a super standard steal, in my opinion, in the high blinds. Of course, in the early blind levels, you'll be raising it from the button and maybe just the cutoff. In the 25-50, you should be raising it from the cutoff, possibly the hijack. In the high blinds, you're raising it from the hijack almost every time, unless you're raising it through a bunch of short stacks, so you'd be committed to call. So this is a missed raise as well. A little bit too tight in some of these situations. Just let this go. He does. Okay, 7s. I would never limp this hand here, ever. I would probably shove it. A small raise would be fine as well, and if you did make that raise, you should be willing to call the re-steal, but never limp this. Most flops are going to be unfavorable. It's going to be hard to continue. Chip stacks are narrow effectively because of this player's stack size. I would never ever limp in this spot. No matter what hand I had, I just wouldn't limp. It looks like he leads out for a pretty solid bet size. I do like the bet sizing for the board and the hand strength. It's fine. Looks like he'll take it down. Not much for hands here for a second. Just fold to 10-7, and he does. This is a missed shove. Once again, a little too tight. 11 blinds deep effectively. Queen 9, super standard shove all day. What I recommend players that I coach in blind versus blind, and this is not a rule set in stone, and I don't follow it as though it's set in stone when I play my games, but it is a very, if you played this style, you would gain money in the long run, and it would be a winning style that's tough to play against. And this is what I recommend to players who are regs, who are winning players, who want to increase their ROI. Maybe they're not at the professional or semi-professional level, but this is a general recommendation I make, and it's a solid recommendation against any opponent type. At 13 blinds or less in blind versus blind, play a strictly shove fold game. If you do that, you'll miss out on a little bit of opportunity in certain spots, but you'll prevent yourself from making any drastic mistakes, and you'll probably be playing a more solid strategy than what you had come in with initially. If you play shove fold at 13 blinds or less, it becomes very easy to play. You'll make almost no mistakes as long as you figure out your shove ranges based on your opponent tightness, looseness, and style. And queen 9 offsuit is going to be a shove all the way up to 13 blinds, so it's certainly a shove here. By folding it, you're giving away equity. I mean, folding is not the right play. Limping is also, in my opinion, not the right play. A small raise might be acceptable against some opponents, as would, I guess, limping, but just playing shove fold is going to be a automatically winning strategy. No matter what your opponent's style or type is, you play shove fold up to 13 blinds and you're shoving correctly, they really can't do much to exploit it. Queen 9 is an easy shove here, and this is a little bit of a missed opportunity. Threes is going to be a shove here. Never ever limp the button, period. It's always a mistake. Play shove fold here, and this is a great shove spot. I would definitely bet the flop. See, I mean, he could have called this bet the flop himself, or shoved pre-flop and possibly won the hand, but none of those opportunities were taken, and so the pot is simply raked over to his opponent. This is a standard raise here with 8-7 suited, also too tight here. I'd probably let this ace-8 go. It's a good re-steal spot, but the raise is coming from a player who's not particularly loose, and it's coming from the hijack. Against a really good loose aggressive reg, I'd shove in here, or a loose aggressive player in general with the capability of folding. Against this player, I think folding is probably the best play, which is what our hero does here. Let the 4-5 go. Queens is going to be a raise, obviously. Makes it 500. That's fine. Just be consistent with it. No callers. I would have made the re-steal myself if this player didn't. Nothing you can do once this player shoves in, but it would have been a great re-steal spot for PGM had it been folded to him after the initial raise. Fold here, obviously. I would shove here to isolate. You can technically shove ace-4 suited for 14 blinds on the cutoff as a plus CEV shove, plus EV shove as well. You're certainly ahead of this player's shoving range, so I would shove here to isolate. He doesn't choose to go for it. He's played a lot of these situations tighter than I would recommend, but you could definitely shove here to isolate. He's standard raise with the ace-queen. He's consistent with the raise size, which I like here. No callers. Get out of the way here with the jack-5. We'll move into the bubble. Blinds have gone up as well. Okay, this is a very good decision here by PGM. A lot of players would call this with the deuces. You should not call. You are ahead of this player in chips just slightly, and you're about even with this player. You do not make break-even calls on the bubble when your chip stack is pretty even with your other opponents. There's no reason to take that risk. You would need a hand quite a bit stronger than this to call here, like 5s or 6s. Not calling with deuces is exactly the correct move, and he does make this. I love this fold that he makes here. It's the right choice all day long. Fold the king-8, also the right choice. Obviously getting in with the aces. I like that he shoves and doesn't try to get cute with it. If he makes a small raise here, it'll look more suspicious. He gets 2 callers. Both callers made the correct choice, as is the initial shover. Looks like we'll move into 3-handed play here in the money. I'd probably try to steal with this 6-8 offsuit. He hasn't been very aggressive with this player. I think he could probably make it like 650, 700 and try to steal it. It's not like it's an automatic raise or something expected, but I think it's a spot he could have gotten away with to accumulate some more chips. Fold the 4-5, which he does. Depending on this player's shove, like his looseness of shoving, you could probably call here. You're in the money. There's a little bit of a bubble still between third and playing in heads up for the win. There are a lot of players I would call here with this ace-4, and I think you could probably call this player here. Ace-9's a raise. You should be willing to call either player's shove. No such opportunity arises. Fold the queen-3. These players will move into heads up. Standard raise here with the ace jack. It shows 900, but he actually makes it 750. As you all well know, this program likes to add the small blind on the raise side. 750 is perfectly fine here. 900 would be too big, but once again, he's not actually making a 900. Shove should be a call here with the ace jack, and he does. Both players do the right thing. Ace jack will win. This jack 6 is a shove for 7 blinds. A little bit of a missed opportunity here. Can't call with the 10-7. Easy shove with the queen. Looks like he limps. Do not limp here. Blinds are 2-4. Just shove all in. Looks suspicious to limp. Shouldn't be limping in heads up anyway, especially as the stack size is this narrow. Good shove over the limp with the 9s. Obviously, you're calling with the queens, and the queens will hold. They'll take first place in this tournament. All right, we'll move on to the next one here. I think this one he actually takes 4th. It's not really important the place a person finishes, but we want to discuss the hands that arises here. Okay, not much here for hands there now. It looks like some of the early blind hands were missed here, but the hands we're concerned about are in the mid and late stages anyway, so we'll look at these. He makes it 200, which is the raise size I use as well. It shows 240, but it's adding the blind on once again. Gets a fold. Okay, this is one hand I wanted to draw attention to. I mentioned this in the previous tournament as well, and I said the same thing as I'm going to say now. Into 5 players and the late blinds, which is 5100 and after, when you start with 1500 chips, you should be raising ace deuce suited plus, ace 9 offsuit plus into 5 players, no matter who they are. You can raise looser than that, depending on your opponents, but you should always raise those hands regardless of their looseness, and that is a rule in stone. There will be very, very few exceptions to that, and there's so few that I'm willing to say just do it every time. Ace deuce suited, ace 9 plus, raise into 5 players in the high blinds, just do it. This is too tight to fold here, and that's why I wanted to address this hand, because it's happened a couple times here. Okay, he gets jacks here. A raise from the button. This should be a re-steal all in over the top. That's exactly what he does. That's the correct play. Don't be flatting these spots. I would steal the king 8. He chooses to fold here. I would steal any suited king 8 plus against most opponents. If I know they're going to re-steal very widely and I can't call, I might let it go. But these are not the players with the courage to come over the top re-stealing wildly, so I would try to steal the hand. I think it's a little bit of a missed opportunity. Certainly raise this. He does choose to do so. I like the min raise. And once again, just be consistent with it, whatever you choose. No defense. I think this is a great steal as well. Into 5 players, I'm just going to list the full range that I suggest. I raise looser than what I'm about to suggest, but I think if you raised this range, it would serve you well, and you'd do well in, from this position. A lot of players are too tight into 5 players. It's an excellent spot to steal from because players expect you to have a tight range, and you can get away with looser raises. My suggested range for you is going to be any pair: ace deuce suited plus, ace 9 plus, as mentioned before, king 9 suited plus, king jack offsuit, queen 9 suited plus, queen jack offsuit, jack 9 suited plus, 10-8 suited plus, 9-8 suited, 8-7 suited. Once again, I do raise looser than that. I'm not recommending you do the same. It's something that you need the confidence to experience to be able to raise looser than that. But if you raise the hands I just listed, it would serve you well. And if you're uncomfortable with some of the smaller suited connectors like 8-7 suited or 10-8 suited, it's fine to throw those out of the range. But queen 9 suited, I would consider a very standard raise here among regs. And you'll find if you were to talk to 10 very strong regs in sit and goes, 9 of them would tell you to raise this hand in this spot. That's how much consensus there is. So it is a raise, and I would suggest making it. Fold the jack 9. Fold 3, 4. I like the fold here. It's a little too short to be limping. It's not good enough to shove. It's the right play, and it's a disciplined play, and I like it. Keeps getting junk hands here. Not much you can do with that. Fold the 4-5 suited. 3x raises in general, especially in the later blind levels. This is not so much true in the early parts of the tournament, but in the later blind levels, they're generally indicative of strength. I would rarely re-steal over the top, especially with marginal hands when you see these 3x raises, unless you learn fairly certainly that this player, that's just their tendency is to make raises of this size. So good fold here. I wouldn't squeeze this. You can't flat it. You're too short, right at 10 blinds. Ace-4 offsuit squeeze is a terrible play because it doesn't do well in multi-way showdowns. He'd basically just be banking on this player just folding. So once again, this fold is the prudent play. It's the right play. I like the decision. And he would have been certainly called by the king-queen there. This is an open shove with ace-10 suited. That's what he chooses to do. It's the right play. Once again, don't come over the top with right at 10 blinds, 11 blinds with marginal hands against 3x raises for a re-steal. This is a good fold. Agreeing with almost all of these decisions here in this later part. Shove the jack 9 offsuit. He chooses to fold this. This is a missed opportunity. 10 blinds, blind versus blind, jack 9 is a shove against any player's calling range. You could even shove this for 12 blinds against any player's calling range. Fold this. This is the bubble. We'll shove the 6s. He does shove. I'd probably re-steal this. I'd probably come over the top with this ace-4. He doesn't choose to do so. It's a great re-steal spot, though. Folding these opportunities and folding these marginal shove spots, which are plus EV, you can see those decisions adding up and being short stacked here. Had those opportunities been taken, this player would either be a chip leader, have more chips accumulated through stealing, or he'd be out. But it would be better to have those alternatives than to be a diminished stack here. You don't play for third, you play for the win. One first is worth more than several thirds. I would have been shoving very loosely already. This is a shove with the queen 6. It's a missed opportunity once again. You could shove probably any 2 cards at this point based on the image here. Queen 6 is certainly a shove against any opponent at this stack size. Shove the aces. Just check this down is fine. Shove the ace-7. Good call with the jacks, obviously, and the jacks will hold. So I hope you all enjoyed that. I'll be coming out with more of these videos soon as an exploration of the new PokerStars sit and go structure. I know a lot of you are interested in that. Thank you again, once again, PGM, for providing the tournaments. As you know, I am in Las Vegas and only able to play on other sites, not on PokerStars right now. So this is a good opportunity for me to be able to review these tournaments. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me at againstime@gmail.com, and you can do the same for training as well.